Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a new weekly podcast shining a spotlight on Australian fiction. My name is Claudine Tinellis. As a writer and avid reader, I love chatting about books. And in this podcast, I'll chat to authors, publishers and readers, giving you, dear listener, insight into what's hot on the Australian fiction scene. So if you're looking for your next book recommendation or just want to know more about Aussie fiction writers, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and enjoy.
Listeners, more than 100 episodes into this podcasting caper, and I'm still constantly amazed by the wonderful authors and readers that I've had the great fortune to connect with through our mutual love of books. No more is this so than with my next guest. We first connected via social media when her first book was about to be published back in 2019, and almost 2 years to the day we had our first podcast chat. In that time, I've watched this author's rising star with awe and amazement. She is a force to be reckoned with. Not only is she a talented writer, but she's a wonderful home baker and a garden guru, as well as a social media and marketing whiz, an avid reader, book reviewer, and staunch supporter of her writing peers. Today, in honour of the release of her third novel, Magpie's Bend, I'm thrilled to be speaking with the delightful Linnell once again. Welcome back to the podcast, May.
Thank you for that lovely welcome, Claudine. It is amazing that you have so many episodes under your belt, and it really just feels like the other day that we were only talking for the launch of my first book. Gosh, time flies when you're having fun, doesn't it?
It certainly does. So I wanted to say officially, happy release day, lovely. And how are you feeling about the release of Magpie's Bend?
Thank you, Claudine. Look, it never gets old. I think maybe when I've got my 50th book out in the world, perhaps then I might go, oh, yes, release day. But I tell you what, I bounded out of bed this morning just feeling like it's my birthday. And even my husband, who's not much of a birthday type of person, the first thing he said to me in the morning was, happy launch day. So it's been a lovely morning, and I've had a neighbour drop off a beautiful Black Forest cake and a bottle of champagne. So I think the day's only going to get better and better.
Obviously, this is book number 3, and you just said it doesn't get old, but does it get any easier or less stressful with subsequent books?
Oh, that's a good question. Do you know, I think you know what's going to happen, as in the process of how the book's going to come out and the different marketing and publicity things that are involved in it more so. I know that was a bit of a shock on the first book, just how many different interviews and blog interviews, different things like that were involved, which is wonderful because some authors, don't get an amazing run with the publicity. I've been so fortunate to have a great team behind me and supporters. So I think in knowing what's coming, it does get easier. But then you still feel so nervous when that book is out in the world. The very first review copies, before you've heard back from anyone aside from my mum, my husband, my nana, and my publisher, who obviously has a vested interest in telling me that the book is good. So that there is still that nerve-wracking wait. And I guess it's a little bit easier because I figure that there's people that have enjoyed the first 2 books, so surely there's going to be something they're going to like about the third book. And then when those reviews do start coming in, you can sleep a little bit easier at night.
Magpie's Bend is essentially the third instalment of the McIntyre sisters' stories. And Wildflower Ridge followed Penny, Bottlebrush Creek was about Angie, and now Magpie's Bend focuses on Lara. So I'm guessing there's going to be a fourth for the final sister, Diana, right?
Yes, there certainly is, Claudine. I couldn't leave Diana out, being the eldest sister in the McIntyre clan. She definitely, probably above all, deserves her own book. So yes, I'm working on her book. And at the moment, it has the working title Rosella Hill, and it's about a dahlia farm. And hopefully it should all be out next winter. So same time next year, and Bob's your uncle.
But you can read each one independently, right?
Yes, and I have had some people that have come across Magpie's Bend as their first book. Some of the early reviewers that received it hadn't read either Bottlebrush Creek or Wildflower Ridge, and they enjoyed it so much they said, well, now I'll be going back and getting the first 2. So that's always lovely. But then for the people that have loved Penny's story and then Angie's story, they are just in their element because you've got characters from the first 2 books that make these beautiful guest appearances, and then there's a whole cast of new ones as well.
Okay, so without further ado, perhaps you can tell listeners about Magpie's Bend and what inspired Lara's story.
Yes, I'd love to. With Magpie's Bend, we've got a story about Lara living in the small town of Bridgefield, which is set in Western Victoria. And she is a bush nurse. She works at the bush nursing centre in town. She's a long-distance runner. She's got her beautiful daughter, Evie, who's away at boarding school. We find out really early in the story. And then right at the start, there's a huge, big kerfuffle, and all of a sudden, Lara's on the scene. She's meeting this new journalist who's in town called Toby Paxton, and it becomes pretty clear very early on that there's a problem with the general store, and whether they're going to have to close the store because there's an illness, or whether they're going to renovate it, send it out for tender, what's going to happen. So there's a big mystery about what's going to happen to the store. And of course, you know, Lara gets roped into helping out, and her sisters and her dad as well. So there's a whole cast of characters that kind of come on board to see whether they can save this general store or whether it gets sold to out-of-towners. And the inspiration for this, there's so many different prongs, and I don't know whether other writers do this, but I seem to plunge all these different little bits into my stories that, you know, have little relevance, or stories people have told me, or articles I've read in the newspaper. But I guess if you had to nail it down to just two threads, well, the first one that came to me when I was writing my second book, and I thought, well, what are we going to do for Lara? I knew she was a runner. So right up in the very first book, I set her up as being someone who runs for therapy. That's her time to just churn things over in her head. So I helped organise a fun run back in 2014, and we were the inaugural winter solstice fun run in our town because there was nothing happening in the middle of winter. There's this fantastic big marathon and half marathon that happened in November, but there was nothing in the winter. And as someone who was training quite actively, I thought, well, you know, what about all the people that are training in winter? We need to set up this fun run. Anyway, long story short, for several years I helped organise that fun run, and one of the years I was race director. So I thought, Lara loves running. She's going to need to do something involving a fun run. So I started the book in the first draft. That was right at the start. And then as I worked through the story, I put that right to the end. So we've got a fun run. That's one of the fundraisers that they do to try and help save this general store. But that whole aspect of the general store being in danger, and the town perhaps missing out on their postal service and their milk and their bread and their newspapers, and that little hub of the community, that came from our local general store having a similar issue, in that the shop had been there for many, many years. You know, it says Danny and Andrea's shop up the top of it, even though when we moved to town there was no mention of anyone called Andrea, but you know, it's just an institution of the town. And there was some issues there, and it looked like it was going to close. So out where there was town meetings and everyone's scrambling to come up with ideas, oh, what if we had a consortium and we could all go in and buy shares in this store? So that didn't happen with our town, but that whole concept of, well, it could, and I knew other towns where it had. So that kind of influenced that little theme there. And then, you know, there's all these different things, like a little magpie flying into our lives that we looked after for a little while, and he'd eat worms and sit on our shoulders and peck at our hair, trying to hope that we had nets, but we didn't. So little things like that just kind of all came together and became Magpie's Bend.
Lara was perhaps the least likeable sister for me, certainly when I read Wildflower Ridge for the first time. And I'm sure I'm not alone in that regard. There were some quite dark themes around her backstory, and this book picks up on some of those themes years after they initially happened. And we see Lara as changed by those experiences, but not in an entirely good way.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, when I wrote the little plot line that came through in Wildflower Ridges as Lara being quite a harsh character, and yeah, I did. She was polarising. We had a few people that wrote to me to say, oh, I loved the McIntyre sisters, but oh, I couldn't have a bar of Lara. And then right towards the end, you know, you get a bit more of an inkling as to why she is as she is. So she was, I think, in my head, going to be a tough one to write, because I knew that, you know, there was that polarity about whether people liked her or didn't. But I think in getting to give her her time into the sun, I really got to showcase the softer sides of her and the strengths of her. And she mellowed out a lot in the second book. In Bottlebrush Creek, she was a lot more of a shoulder to lean on than she was in the first book. And so by the time it came to give her her own story, you know, I really was looking forward to giving her, I guess, some airtime and really digging a bit deeper into, what she's had to put up with and how strong she's been to come through the different issues and still be, a really important part of her family and well respected within the community. And find new ways for her, I guess, to shine.
So domestic violence in its various forms is something that intrigues me and something that many writers are touching on more and more in their stories, since it affects so many women, many more women than we can truly appreciate. So I wanted to ask you, why was it important for you to shine a light on this topic in this story?
Yeah, Claudine, you have nailed it, because that is exactly why I wanted to talk about it. Because if you look at those stats, is it 1 in 3 or 1 in 5? Well, if I sat down with my girlfriends in a room for a cocktail night, then whether I know about it or not, somebody in that room would theoretically have been touched by domestic violence. But there are many different ways of coping with it. And I think from the experiences of friends that have, shared their stories with me of things that they've gone through that have been, really obviously very distressing and very tough times for them. Finding out those different little backstories after having known them and appreciated them as the strong, beautiful women that they are, it just gives you that bit more compassion and I guess that willingness to want to try and shine that spotlight on the issue, that it's, it's so many different reasons and a myriad of situations that it involves. But when I was doing some work for a health promotion agency, one of the campaigns that I was helping do the publicity for was the, I don't know if it was the 11 days of activism or the 14 days of activism, a particular campaign that this health agency were running, all about, I guess, shining the spotlight on domestic violence. And they had these tote bags that were fluoro orange, and they had the, printing on the side saying respect is respect. And so these bags had different slogans about what's not okay and ways to address domestic violence. And they were given out to our local IGA supermarket instead of the other reusable bags that they were doing. So we were doing this whole campaign about it. And I would see things like letters to the editor, and I would be reading them. And then there was these jokes in the local newspaper that were, I don't know, maybe about 50 years old. And I was enraged because I was working so hard on this campaign to help promote this thing. And here's this awful joke in the joke section next to the TV guide in the newspaper, making some ridiculous thing about someone who shot his wife, and it's a joke. And, of course, so for me, that was straight to the letters to the editor and things like that, because you just can't let these things slide. And it's that slippery scale. If we all sit around and let it happen, it's just going to get worse. But I digress. So those different instances did influence me putting that plot in the book. And I really wanted to just, I guess, have it there for all the people who have gone through something like that and come out the other side with a happily ever after.
Toby was a lovely character. I could see your years of experience as a journalist working on a regional newspaper shining through this character for sure. But was he inspired by any real life characters?
I love Toby Paxton, Claudine. And as I was writing the story, I really enjoyed his character. He was just a really lovely bloke to be working with constantly. So yes, I did put a lot of my years of the country newspaper into that story, and putting in the different things that I would do on a daily basis, the huge piles of newspapers that are in your office that kind of take up every space, because you don't want to throw away articles, editions that have got your articles in them. And then that whole jack of all trades that a country journalist needs to be, because you'll be doing the a front page fatality one day, and then you'll be doing the school baking sale or competition the next day, and all the variation of the different people that will call you up to tell you these wonderful things about their amazingly gifted grandchild that needs to have another article, even though you did one just a month ago. So I really enjoyed putting those in. But I can't say that Toby's based on anyone, and I can't even think of an actor that I would say, oh, he would play Toby Paxton, because, yeah, in my head, I know that he's got that kind of blondie, light brown hair. But apart from that, and his odd socks, of course, which, I did steal that from my husband, because when I first met him, wearing a nice suit at a black tie ball, he's got odd socks on, football socks, no less. So I did steal that little bit and give that to Toby. But no, not one person at all.
Our first chat on this podcast 2 years ago, Mayor, I think it's fair to say that you've garnered an impressive fan base for your books. Readers who've come to love your trademark themes of rural living, family and romance, coloured with humour, baking, gardening and nuanced personalities. Do you think that this dials up the pressure for you in terms of delivering subsequent books, or does it make you feel secure in the knowledge that people are going to welcome your story?
I'll never stop being amazed by the people that will, come on board and hang out with me on social media and comment on different photos and ask me for suggestions of what roses to plant or what to bake for their kids' school lunchboxes. It's so humbling to have this beautiful community of people that seem to love, the things that I love. I think that's what makes it a really good fit because, these things that I love, I just can't help but throw into my novels. And, if the McIntyre sisters aren't baking, then one of them will be out picking roses and the next one will be thinking about planting some dahlias and the next one will be getting some more farm animals to add to their tribe. So I think it's a really nice place to be in where I've got people that like what I like and they, like what's in the books as well, and it kind of all ties nicely together.
Yeah, I guess I was going to say that I feel as if the world that you've created for the McIntyre sisters is not far from your own world.
Look, there's a lot of inspiration to be had from our own backyard. We're lucky to live in a really beautiful spot in the world in southwest Victoria, and there are lots of beautiful things in our garden, in our paddocks, in our kitchen that just seem to lend themselves to being photographed. So yes, I do like to take those inspirations for my books and for my different social media too.
So one of the many themes in your book that I found interesting was the meat packing. At McIntyre Farm, and it screams farm life, and not just that, but something the whole family gets involved in. I could definitely see your life shining through here. So for listeners who don't know what I'm talking about, can you walk me through this and how it plays out in your own life?
It makes me laugh because when we first moved to our little rural property here, my husband said, well, obviously, if we've got 8 acres, we'll be running some cattle or some pigs or some lambs with the view to having our own meat. And I said, but how's that going to work? The kids will be horrified, if we have all these beautiful animals and eventually they end up in the freezer. How does that work? He said, well, it's just part of farm life, Maya. So he grew up on a farm and I grew up with farm land all around me, but my parents weren't farmers. So we went to the butchers and got our meat, whereas my husband grew up making their own sausages and cutting up chops and knowing exactly where their meats come from. So we decided to adopt a bit of that. And of course, when I was writing this book, there were so many different things in the process of us learning how to butcher our own meat and process it. Stories that we found funny about things like when somebody trips over the power cord and the cool room that you've hired, that you've got, 2 beasts hanging in with, I think we got 100 and something kilos of meat off one of our cows. For that to spoil or to potentially spoil, it's, oh my goodness, you've gone to all this work to grow the animals for 2 years and then to do it. So I couldn't help but toss a little bit of that in there. And we've got flavours of sausages that we love. So I've popped a few different combos in case anyone else wants to make their own sausages. But there's something about the taste of meat, from an animal that has had a fantastic life and a very respectful, peaceful end. All hands on deck, because when you're packing meat, you need every single hand that you can get and every single bench space. So when we're doing meat packing day, just like when the McIntyres in the book are doing meat packing day, you've got kids picking up the fat trimmings, you've got someone taking out the bones for the dogs and someone taking the nicely packed meat after they've weighed it and written the how much it weighs on it. It needs to go out to the freezer. So there's so many different jobs for all skill levels, and it is quite a fun occasion. We've got friends who have these beautiful big meat packing days and extended family come and do it with them, which I think is wonderful.
Okay, so what do your family think about your novels and the characters you've created? Does anyone ask if your characters are based on them?
Yeah, I get that all the time, Claudine. And I think most authors will get that. And they'll mistake me for the main character. So my dad listens on audiobook. He loves reading, but his main favourite thing now is audiobooks because he can do it when he's mowing, and he loves mowing. So he said to me the other day, oh, Maya, I've just finished Bottlebrush Creek, but do you not like motorbikes, Maya? I think you've got an issue with motorbikes. And, well, I've grown up in a family that's had motorbikes for many, many years. And, Angie in the book in Bottlebrush Creek, she's got a bit of an issue because her husband is spending more time with his motorbikes than he should be on the renovation. So there's a bit of a conflict there. I said, Dad, it's not me. It's Angie. It's Angie McIntyre with the red curly hair and the child called Claudia. It's not me. I can give them whatever they want. She could be a chain-smoking alcoholic that, rides bucking bulls on the weekend in the rodeos. That's not necessarily me. So I will have that. And then the kids play quite an interesting role because they love hearing what the different characters are up to. And they feel like they know what the story's about before it's even published. I think my youngest said, yeah, well, I don't need to listen to the audiobook, Mum, because I already know what it's about. I was there while you're writing it. And because I'm constantly, talking about Eddie, and I'm talking about Nana Pearl, and I'm talking about Mrs. Beggs, and the different characters that are in the story feel real to them as well. So I'm lucky I've had very good support from my family and friends and neighbours that drop off, beautiful cakes on launch day.
I may have asked you this before, but all the McIntyre sisters share a love of baking, something handed down to them from their mother, Annabelle. They bake as a stress reliever and in times of difficulty as a way of showing their love, perhaps. Is this reflective of your own experiences?
I love to bake. I love to teach my children how to bake. Downstairs, the kids were talking about, what cake can we make to celebrate Mum's launch? So they were poring over the recipe book. And I do think it's a really nice way to unwind. You've got the quantities, you need to have it precise for it to work. So you've got that mindfulness of doing the actual act of baking. And I always love being able to give something nice to, someone that's having a hard time, or new neighbours that have come to town. We'll take them some homemade jam and some fresh eggs and a bunch of flowers from the garden. The new neighbours that moved in from Melbourne a couple of blocks over were just blown away. They said, we don't even know our neighbours in Melbourne, but now we've got homegrown eggs and fresh homemade jam from strawberries that we've grown in our own garden. And I think there's a cake or some biscuits. But it's a really nice thing to be able to do, and it's not expensive. You don't have to spend bucket loads of money making someone a cake, but it's, a really nice way to show your appreciation or thanks, or just I'm thinking of you.
I often look to you as inspiration in my own writing journey, but for many of the writers out there, and for those who haven't heard you speak before, I wondered if perhaps you could share your top 3 writing tips.
Oh, Claudine, I always love listening to your writing tips at the end of the podcast too. I quite enjoy all the different ones because everyone's got different ways they do things. And I like how Esther Campion said that there's no right way or wrong way, and she wouldn't at all presume to know better than any other writer. She was very humble, a great guest. I think the things that have worked for me have been working on that draft until you get to the end, because it is so tempting to pick it apart and go, it's a mess. I can't bear to look at it. I don't know how to move forward. I'll just go back and tizzy up the first chapter / 60,000 words, and then you don't reach the end. So that's one of my favourite ones. And I have to tell myself that all the time too, Claudine. It's so tempting to know that you're in this big hole, but that perseverance to keep ploughing through is really beneficial, because then you can say, the end, that is the first draft finished, and I will now make it better, as opposed to, I still haven't finished that darn first draft. So that's definitely tip number 1. Tip number 2 is to listen to fabulous podcasts like your own, because there's so many different tips to pick up from even just this one, question at the end. But in terms of process, everyone has their own little methods and things that will just twig in my mind for every now and then. So in the middle of lockdown last year, I took on board some of Sally Hepworth's talk about the nifty 350 of getting 350 words done before she got out of bed. So at least she had, that ground base of 350 words. So for quite a while I was doing that, which was really cool. Except then I realised that didn't work so well with my plans to exercise in the early mornings, because that's what I like to do before the kids go to school and before they're up and having breakfast. So I kind of stopped doing that after a while, but there's always little gems that will work well. Graham Simpson from the Rosie Project, he said, write all your different scenes on little cue cards. So as you're thinking out your next novel, just write, one scene a day, even if it's just a sentence to say, Lara organises a fun run, and that's it. And you put it down, and then when you finish thinking, brainstorming that story, then at least you've got this whole pack of cue cards that have got a heap of ideas. So you've got something to work with. And then the other idea is put some scaffolding under you, in that you can do writing courses so easily these days, no matter where you are. I love that the Northern Beaches Readers and Writers Festival have got that contest for people who can win themselves a seat on the Unlocking Creativity course with the Writers Studio Australia. Because for me, I wanted to make a commitment to writing. And by making an investment, you are not going to waste your money, or you're not as likely to waste your money and waste your time by thinking about it but not actually ever doing it. So for me, that writing course was really valuable.
Now, because I think you do such a stellar job of marketing your own books, what tips would you have for those authors seeking to get their books into more readers' hands?
I like to be able to work in tandem with my publishers. So I'm really lucky in that there's a fantastic team at Allen Unwin that do the really hard work in putting, the editing in, the structural edits, the copy edits, and the proofreading edits. They've also got a beautiful cover designer who puts together this. I'm so thrilled with the Magpie's Ben cover. It just blew me away. Very pleased. And they also work really hard on the marketing and publicity. So making sure it gets into the right bookstores and trying to get it into the right readers' hands. But there's so much an author can also put towards that. And it's in your own best interest as well to, put a bit of effort into your own marketing. I've been really lucky to do some great collaborations with different organisations. The Rural Women's Day was a really wonderful initiative. The lady that runs Rural Women's Day website and runs events in Western Victoria and also New South Wales each year, she's not that far down the road, but we'd had a whole catch-up through social media for a good year before actually doing anything together. But there are so many different parallels, things that really suit your brand, and the people that follow the Rural Women's Day are exactly the type of people that are going to enjoy reading rural romance. So for me, when we did a giveaway, it was a copy of each of my books, some beautiful earrings, and Rural Women's Day magazine. That was wonderful, and that really exposed me to a lot of different people in their audience. And my following's not huge, but it's a really lovely, engaged community. And so to kind of tap into a few different networks is great. So I think finding out what your brand is and where your books sit, also seeing what other authors is doing is really important. I don't think you ever want to copy what another author is doing, because we're all running our own race, and people that love books will not just buy one book a year, they'll buy multiple. So there's no sense in copying someone else, and it doesn't look good for you or them. But I think you can see, whether giveaways are working, whether getting yourself out to more library talks, meeting people in person, and just joining some different networks. I think it's a really valuable thing to invest your time in as an author, because people are interested in what's happening behind the scenes. And there's only so many photos you can take of your keyboard, or, you're tapping away at the computer before people go, oh, gosh, this is boring.
If listeners wanted to find out more about you and your books, where could they do that?
Yeah, I love hearing from readers, Claudine, and the little messages that I get sent about people who've just finished my book, or they're just excited to start the book, or somebody's given it for them for their birthday. So people can contact me through my website. I've got a blog there. There's recipes, there's author interviews, there's giveaways, and that's mayalinnell.com. There's also my Instagram, which is my favourite platform because it's perfect for taking lots of beautiful photos. And that's maya.linnell.writes. So maya.linnell.writes. And also Facebook as well. So I have a profile and I also have a business page. Now, the business page is the one that's most updated. That's more, I guess, geared towards the people that read my books as opposed to the people that I went to high school with. And I also have a newsletter that comes out once a month as well, on the first weekend of every month. And that's where they have all the information about those giveaways that I was talking about and what's new in the book world.
I subscribe to that newsletter and I absolutely love it when I see it hit my inbox at the beginning of every month. There's always so much to read and to be inspired by in your newsletters.
Thank you, Claude. That's lovely of you.
Congratulations once more on another wonderful tale in Magpie's Bend. I felt like I was coming home as I immersed myself in Lara's story. I can't wait to see what you do next. Thank you for joining me on Talking Aussie Books.
Thank you very much, Claudine. It's been a pleasure being on your wonderful podcast again, and I look forward to tuning into more of your interviews.
Well, that's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes or drop me a line via my Instagram at Claudine Tinellis or on my webpage claudinetинellis.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, happy reading.